She was a war goddess who chose death, until a human showed her mercy. HFY Sci-Fi Audiobook. Before I start the story, drop a comment and let me know. From which country are you watching from? Let's begin the story. The Bridge of the Dreadnought. Vorak's wrath pulsed with lethal intent as Serenya Veyra stood before the tactical display, her luminous violet hair shimmering in the glow of orbital cannons primed to fire, her silver armor etched with runes that once made soldiers bow as if before a living god, and tonight those runes would burn their last, because Serenya had chosen death over the humiliation of defeat, her life as fuel for one final cleansing strike that would erase the last human stronghold, the bunker where scraps of resistance still clawed at survival. But even as her officers reported collapsing defenses and human retreat, her sharp ears caught a discordant note inside herself, hesitation, a hairline fracture in the perfect discipline she had lived by for centuries, hesitation at the thought of wiping out creatures so stubborn, so fragile yet impossibly relentless, who salvaged rust and ruin into weapons that somehow stalled the mighty Verith war machine longer than they had any right to. Hesitation that was growing harder to silence with every strike she commanded. "War goddess," her lieutenant rasped, claws scraping the deck as his massive frame bent toward her. "The humans flee to their final shelter, shall we pursue?" Serenya touched the edge of her armor, her melodic voice calm, cold, absolute. "No. One strike will end this rebellion. With my life as the offering, honor will be satisfied." Her officers bowed, but her heart felt heavier than her armor. The bombardment countdown began, seconds bleeding away toward annihilation. The alarms came first as whispers, then shrieks. Hull breach, Deck 7. Impossible. No human should have breached a Verith dreadnought. The bridge doors burst inward in a spray of molten steel and smoke, and through it stepped a figure that should not exist here. Broad-shouldered, scarred, human. Kael Daren emerged with the calm certainty of a man already past fear. His beard was dark against a face weathered by war, his tied-back hair loose from the fight, eyes steady as they fixed on her, eyes that saw not a goddess, but a woman, about to throw her life away. He carried not Verith weaponry, but something cruder, salvage parts twisted into a neural disruptor no human should have been able to build. "Stand down," he said, and for a heartbeat even her own soldiers froze at the impossible weight in his voice. The Verith enforcer lunged, claws like blades, but Kael moved with savage precision, his calloused hands snapping a net of crackling cables across the warrior's body, electricity flaring, the giant collapsing in convulsions. Serenya's hand touched her sidearm, but when Kael's eyes locked with hers, something inside her wavered. Not savage hatred, not desperate fury, but calm mercy. "You were going to die for what?" he demanded, stepping closer, his rough hands already dismantling the bombardment console she had armed. "Honor? Pride? Or because you can't see another way?" His words pierced deeper than any blade. She had delayed strikes before, letting civilians escape, whispering to herself it was tactical, not weakness. But this human knew. He had seen her hesitation. "Why not kill me?" she forced out, clinging to divine authority. "Why capture the war goddess?" Kael extended his hand not to strike, but to offer. His voice dropped to something almost intimate. "Because maybe you've been looking for a reason to live instead of die. And maybe you can save more lives than you've taken." For the first time in centuries, Serenya Veyra, war goddess of the Verith, felt something she could not name. And as the rebel team stormed her bridge, she realized her choice was no longer between death and honor. It was between chains she was born into, and a freedom she had never dared imagine. The rebel bunker was no throne room, No cathedral of war carved in steel and fire, but a hollowed cavern of stone and scavenged plating where recycled air tasted faintly of iron and sweat. And here, surrounded by the ragged remnants of humanity, Serenya Veyra sat on a plain cot with her silver armor dulled, its power feeds severed, her wrists bound by restraints that hummed with stolen Verith energy. Yet her posture remained impossibly regal, back straight, pointed ears high, luminous hair flowing even in this dim light. Because even stripped of her dreadnought, she was still the war goddess of her people, and no one dared meet her gaze for long except one man. Kael Daren knelt beside her with a small kit of salvaged tools and bandages, his scarred hands steady, as he examined the raw burn across her wrist where his disruptor's net had seared her flesh. His touch firm yet careful, nothing like the ceremonial attendance she had known for centuries, and the sensation unsettled her more than any weapon. She narrowed her eyes, melodic voice sharp. "I require no assistance," yet she did not pull away. "Everyone requires assistance sometimes," Kael murmured, his deep voice carrying no mockery, no triumph, only simple truth, and when he glanced up, his brown eyes locked on hers, steady and unflinching. "Even war, goddesses." Her ears flicked in irritation at the title, her people's sacred burden made into something almost casual in his mouth. "You understand nothing. I was forged for conquest. My wounds are irrelevant." "Flesh and blood," Kael interrupted softly, his calloused fingers securing the bandage with efficient care. "Same as anyone else." The statement should have been laughable, blasphemous even, but instead it struck deeper than any chant of loyalty she had ever commanded. Around them the bunker lived, rebels bent over consoles pieced from Verith scrap, engineers smudged with grease muttering calculations, guards pacing with weapons cobbled from enemy rifles, and still Kael tended her as if she were no different than one of his own wounded. "You should not have resisted," she said finally, searching for footing in doctrine. "Your defenses could not have withstood the strike." Kyle's mouth curved in something that might have been a smile, though it was weary and edged with defiance. "We adapted your targeting arrays, found a blind spot. You never considered anyone might hide inside the resonance frequency of your scanners." His tone carried quiet pride, and against her will Serenya felt the faintest stirrings of awe. Impossible. Yet she had already seen the impossible in the human standing before her. He moved to check her shoulder where her armor had bruised flesh during the fight, peeling back a section with careful fingers, and she found herself holding her breath. The air thickened, not with smoke or battle, but with something unnamed that pressed between them. His touch was warm, steady, entirely without fear. "You've killed thousands of us," he said at last, voice low, not accusation but fact. His thumb brushed the edge of the bruise with a gentleness that startled her. "But maybe that doesn't have to be the only story you tell." Her armor suddenly felt heavier, less like divine mantle, more like a cage. For the first time, Serenya wondered if the human's hands were not dismantling her restraints, but dismantling something far older, something carved into her since birth. And in the echoing cavern of rebels and recycled air, the war goddess realized mercy was more dangerous than any blade. The ground shook with distant detonations as Verith search parties swept sector by sector, their scanners pulsing like cold heartbeats across the ruined valley. And inside the rebel stronghold, Kael made the call no one wanted to hear. Evacuation. Not battle. Because the enemy was coming with precision Serenya herself had once taught. And to stay was to be buried alive under orbital fire. So into the ancient maintenance tunnels they fled, carved long ago for mining but now turned into veins of survival. Narrow passages where stone walls pressed close and shadows swallowed the weak glow of portable lamps. Serenya walked among them in silence, her armor stripped of power, yet still gleaming faintly, her violet hair catching shards of light as though mocking the darkness, and every rebel eye that flicked her way carried a mix of awe and fear. Awe at what she had been, fear at what she still could be. But none dared speak, because Kael walked at her side, tall and broad. His presence, the anchor that steadied even their terror of marching with a goddess marked for death. They reached a cavern wide enough to breathe, its ceiling dripping with moisture, emergency lamps casting long shadows, and here the rebels unrolled salvaged equipment, consoles pieced from Verith wreckage, generators that hummed with unstable power. Kael knelt by a half-assembled device, sweat streaking his forehead as his scarred hands worked with furious precision, fitting alien circuits together with human ingenuity. Serenya watched, at first in silence, until recognition stirred in her trained eyes. "That pathway," she said at last, her melodic voice carrying easily in the cave. "You are reinforcing the frequency instead of breaking it. The drones will find you within the hour." Kael froze, gaze snapping up to hers, suspicion flashing. "You'd help us hide from your own people?" Her ears twitched at the disbelief. "I would help myself survive. Do not mistake that for loyalty." Yet she knelt beside him anyway, her slender fingers tracing across the glowing array with sure confidence. "Invert the phase here. Destructive interference will blind their sensors." Their shoulders brushed as they leaned over the device, and the contact was so slight, so ordinary. Yet it sent a warmth through her armor that battle had never given her. Kael noticed it too, not in words, but in the stillness that came when his hand brushed hers, adjusting the circuits, in the faint shift of his breathing as their proximity closed a distance neither had planned. "Brilliant," Kael murmured. When the hum of the device stabilized into a clear rhythm, the scanners scrambled. The word was simple praise, but from him it carried weight greater than a battlefield's roar. Serenya's ears flicked at the sound, not sure why it mattered that he believed her mind sharp, her insight valuable. Around them the rebels grew, quiet, recognizing the fragile but undeniable cooperation forming in front of them. A goddess once worshipped as death incarnate, now kneeling shoulder to shoulder with the man who had captured her, creating together a defense that kept them alive. For the first time since her capture, Serenya realized she had not been forced into chains, but into choice. And that choice, impossibly, was beginning to feel like freedom. The cave had settled into uneasy rhythm, rebels whispering over salvaged displays while damp stone dripped with a slow, steady beat, and Serenya sat apart on a jagged ledge, her silver armor dim, without its power feeds, her pointed ears twitching at every sound beyond human range, alert not for attack, but for the absence of something she could not name. Then the transmission came, cold and clinical, slipping through Kael's jury-rigged receivers in the language of the Verith, a voice from high command that Serenya knew by cadence alone, the kind of voice that announced wars, victories, and executions without a tremor. "War goddess Serenya Veyra compromised by human influence," the broadcast declared, echoing against the cave walls with merciless clarity. Her tactical hesitations noted, deemed unacceptable, effective immediately, stripped of title, marked for termination upon recovery, successor designated for deployment. Every rebel froze, eyes flicking from the translation. Kael muttered to the woman sitting in shadow, once their executioner, now the quarry of her own empire. Serenya did not flinch, but Kael, watching her closely, saw the subtle tightening of her jaw, the stillness in her fingers where they had been tracing the lines of her armor. She had expected this. She had known. "You knew," Kael said quietly, rising from the console to stand before her. His scarred face was creased not with triumph but with something more complex, understanding, maybe even sorrow. "When you armed that orbital strike, you knew it was suicide." Her melodic voice carried no hint of self-pity when she replied, The resonance field would have consumed the dreadnought, an elegant solution to an inconvenient liability. Her violet hair shimmered faintly in the emergency light, but her eyes were distant, unfocused, like someone staring at her own funeral pyre. They never intended to retrieve you, Kael pressed, his tone rough. They used your mission as execution. A hesitant war goddess serves no purpose. Serenya's hands clenched against her knees, but her mask of divine authority cracked at the edges. For the first time since her capture, she looked not like a goddess but a woman abandoned. I should have died with honor, she whispered more to herself than to him. Instead of what? Kael cut in, his voice low but firm, stepping close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. Instead of choosing to live? Instead of finding something worth living for? Her ears flicked at his intensity, the human fire in his words a language foreign to her kind. What do you know of honor, human? Of duty to something greater than yourself? Kael's shoulders straightened, his scarred arms crossed as he answered with quiet conviction. I know duty to my people, to the ones who trust me to keep them alive, to the future we're trying to build. His gaze held hers unyielding. That's greater than pride, greater than dying for nothing. Silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of truths neither had wanted to face. Around them, the rebels busied themselves with feigned focus, giving the two figures a wide berth as if sensing this moment was more dangerous than battle. And for the first time in her long, merciless life, Serenya Veyra felt not divine command or crushing duty, but the unbearable possibility that Kael Daren might be right, that living, not dying, could be the greater act of courage. Dawn filtered weakly through the cracks of the cavern ceiling, pale shafts of light cutting across dust motes that floated like faint stars above the sleeping rebels. The cave was quiet, filled only with the soft murmur of air recyclers and the occasional scrape of tools from the lone engineer already at work. Serenya Veyra sat perfectly straight against the cold stone wall, her silver armor muted in the half-light, her violet hair glowing faintly in the dim glow. She had not slept. War goddesses did not need sleep, or so she had always told herself. Yet when Kael Daren appeared from the shadows carrying 2 portions of rations, something within her shifted. Hungry? His deep voice carried an ease she had never heard from a soldier. He set down a small bundle beside her. Processed nutrient bars cracked in half, and a handful of bitter roots one of his scouts had foraged. The smell was unremarkable, but it was food. I require no sustenance, Serenya began automatically. The doctrine drilled into her since childhood. War goddesses consumed only in ceremony, never in need. But Kael only chuckled softly, tearing a bite from one of the roots with an exaggerated grimace. Right. Goddesses don't eat, don't bleed, don't sleep. He chewed and swallowed, with practiced endurance. Guess that makes me lucky. I'm human. I do all 3. Her ears twitched at his casual tone, her pride demanding silence, but something softer moved in her chest. For the first time in centuries, she found herself lowering her hand to accept what he offered. Temporary alliance, she said carefully, bringing the bitter root to her lips. Shared provisions may be practical. There we go. Kael's mouth curved into a small, genuine smile, the kind that transformed his scarred face from a commander's mask into something almost boyish. Practical reasoning that I can work with. The root was sharp on her tongue, unpleasant. But as she chewed, she found herself noticing not the taste but the closeness of his presence, the quiet way he sat beside her so their shoulders nearly touched. It was a strange intimacy, not ceremonial, not commanded, just there. En voce. she said suddenly, surprising even herself. Meals are ritual. Rank dictates who may be present. The higher one's station, the more solitary the consumption. A war goddess always dines alone. Kael turned his head, his gaze steady, unflinching. Sounds lonely. Loneliness is a human concept, she replied automatically, but the words rang hollow even as she spoke them. Is it? Kael asked softly. Then what do you call sitting among thousands, worshipped as divine and still not being truly known by any of them? The question struck harder than any weapon. Her fingers tightened on the simple ration bar, a symbol of common survival. No one had ever asked her such a thing. No one had ever dared. Her armor suddenly felt heavier, her throat tight with words she had no language for. Kael broke the silence, his tone gentler now. I think everyone deserves to be known for who they are, not just for what they were made to be. For the first time in her long, merciless existence, Serenya realized she wanted someone to know her, not as goddess, not as weapon, but simply as herself. And the first person to ever offer her that possibility was the human seated at her side, breaking bread with her in the silence of dawn. The midday sun burned red across the ravaged valley as Kael crouched on the ridge overlooking the Verith supply depot, a sprawling fortress of alloy and energy shields that fed 3 forward bases. It was protected by automated turrets and guard patrols that should have made it impregnable. But Kael's eyes held a spark of certainty as he studied the salvaged tactical display strapped to his wrist. Beside him, Serenya knelt with the poise of a predator, her violet hair bound back for combat, her gaze sharp as she scanned the facility. Your people think only in terms of overwhelming force, Kael murmured, his deep voice steady despite the danger. They won't expect subtlety. They won't expect betrayal either, Serenya replied softly, her melodic voice edged with something more dangerous than defiance. Her pointed ears twitched as she picked up the rhythmic cadence of the Verith guards. Left corridor, 2 soldiers, changing shift in 30 seconds. Kael gave a small nod, scarred hands checking the charge on his jury-rigged disruptor. Around them, rebels waited, hidden among the rocks, faces set with grim determination. These men and women trusted Kael without question, but their eyes kept flicking to Serenya. They still feared her. They had reason to. Signal the teams, Kael said. And in the next breath, shadows moved. The strike began not with thunder but with whispers. Hacked drones projecting false images. Scrambled sensors guiding them through blind spots Serenya herself had pointed out. For a moment it worked flawlessly. The rebels slipped between turrets and through the outer defenses without a sound. Then the unexpected happened. Reinforcements rounded a corner, Verith soldiers armed with weapons Serenya once commanded. The corridor erupted in fire. Energy bolts seared the air, rebels scattering behind shattered cover. Kael raised his disruptor, but Serenya was faster. She moved with deadly grace, her stolen Verith rifle humming as she cut down soldiers with precise bursts. Down, she commanded, and Kael dropped instinctively as a pulse shot screamed over his head, slamming 3 guards into the wall in perfect sequence. The battle became chaos, but within that chaos, something extraordinary happened. Kael and Serenya moved together as if they had fought side by side for years, his improvisation blending seamlessly with her flawless discipline. When Kael rolled to cover her flank, her armor brushed his shoulder. When she pivoted to strike, his weapon fired through the opening she created. Back to back, their bodies pressed close, they turned the corridor into a graveyard of Verith steel and blood. For Kael, her presence was fire at his back, sharp and unstoppable. For Serenya, his was solidity, scarred, stubborn, human, but unyielding. and when she leaned against him to dodge a blast, the press of his body against hers sent a jolt through her chest far stronger than the hum of any weapon. Minutes later, silence returned, broken only by the crackle of damaged circuits. The last guard fell. Kael's breathing was heavy, sweat streaking his scarred face, but his eyes met hers with something unspoken. They had survived. Together. The depot was theirs. But what burned hotter than victory was the fire building in the space between a goddess and a man, a flame neither had expected and neither could ignore. The rebel celebration after the depot raid was muted. No cheers, only weary nods and the brief relief of survival, because everyone knew the Verith would not leave the blow unanswered. Kael's people packed their salvaged gear, moving with sharp efficiency through the cavern hideouts they now called home. But Serenya felt it before the scouts reported it. A pulse in the air, a resonance she knew too well. Her ears flicked, her posture stiffened, and her voice, melodic but tight, carried through the chamber. They have sent her. Kael looked up sharply. Who? My replacement, Serenya answered, her words like stone dropping into a still pool. Lixira. She was raised beside me, forged in the same fire. Where I hesitated, she will not. Where I showed mercy, she will burn worlds. The words proved true within hours. The tunnels shook under the shock wave of a precise orbital strike. Not annihilation, but intimidation, designed to herd survivors like prey. Rebel sensors flickered, then died, blinded by interference. Then came the footsteps. Heavy, precise, too measured to be soldiers. And then she was there. Lixira. Her presence filled the tunnel entrance like a blade of living light. Taller than Serenya, armor gleaming with fresh power runes. Hair, a darker violet that shimmered like burning steel. Her eyes, cold and merciless, found Serenya instantly. Sister, she said, her voice a sharp echo of Serenya's own, stripped of all hesitation. You dishonor us. Rebels raised weapons, but Kael raised his hand to still them, sensing this was not just battle, this was reckoning. Serenya stepped forward, her own armor dim beside Lixira's brilliance, yet her chin lifted with defiance. I chose survival. I chose freedom. You chose weakness, Lixira hissed, drawing her blade, a crackling edge of pure resonance energy. And weakness must be cut away. The clash was instant, metal shrieking as Serenya blocked the first strike with a scavenged rebel staff, reinforced with Verith plating. Sparks burst, the cavern walls lighting with every blow. Lixira pressed her back step by step, her movements the same flawless discipline Serenya had once embodied. To fight her was to fight her own past, her own doctrine, merciless and unyielding. Kael shouted orders, rebels scattering, firing at incoming Verith squads that poured into the tunnels. But his eyes never left the duel, never left Serenya struggling against the embodiment of what she had been. Her breath came fast, her muscles burned, but what weakened her was not fatigue. It was recognition. Lixira moved without hesitation, every strike fueled by blind loyalty to command. Serenya remembered being that weapon, remembered the emptiness of obedience. Her staff splintered under a brutal strike, sending her crashing to the stone. Lixira raised her blade for the killing blow. And then Kael was there, disruptor sparking, as he blocked with desperate precision, the weapon screeching against resonant steel. You're not alone, he growled, scarred arms straining against the goddess's strength. Serenya surged back to her feet, seizing a fragment of broken staff. Side by side with Kael, she met her successor's merciless gaze. And for the first time in her existence, she realized she was no longer fighting for honor, or even survival. She was fighting for a choice, and for the man who had shown her that choice existed. The duel with Lixira shattered the cavern like thunder. Resonant steel screamed as goddess struck against goddess, each blow shaking loose clouds of dust from the ceiling, and around them humans and Verith soldiers clashed in chaos. Kael's rebels fought with desperation, firing improvised weapons, holding the line against impossible odds. But Serenya knew the truth. Lixira had come not to capture, but to annihilate. The successor's precision was flawless, her loyalty absolute. This was what Serenya herself had once been. The perfect executioner. The fight spilled into the outer tunnel where the stolen shuttle Corin's Edge waited, its sleek Verith design glowing faintly as it powered for escape. Kael barked orders to his rebels, his scarred hand steady on his disruptor as he drove back a squad with mechanical precision. Yet his eyes never strayed far from Serenya, his focus tethered to her as if her survival mattered more than victory itself. Lixira lunged, with lethal speed blade aimed to pierce Serenya's heart. Serenya twisted, parrying with a scavenged shaft, but the blow still cut through her armor, searing across her shoulder. Pain flared hot, her breath catching. And in that moment she saw her fate clearly. To continue fighting Lixira was to die. To flee was to leave Kael to death. Neither was acceptable. Her gaze snapped to the shuttle, its hum vibrating in her bones. The gravimetric stabilizers, she realized. A failsafe buried in Verith engineering, one even Lixira might not suspect. To trigger it was madness. It would cripple the ship, perhaps kill her. But it would unleash a pulse strong enough to blind their pursuers, buy time for escape. It was not suicide. It was choice. "Kael," she shouted over the roar of combat, her melodic voice sharper than steel. "Get your people aboard, now!" He turned, defiance flashing in his eyes. "Not without you." "You will," she snapped, and for the first time her tone carried not divine command but urgent plea. "Trust me." Kael's jaw clenched, torn, between instinct and faith, but then he gave a sharp nod, rallying his people into the shuttle. As Lixira's blade cut sparks across the stone, Serenya spun away, sprinting for the control console at the heart of the craft. Her fingers danced, over runes she had been raised to master, bypassing safeties with fluid ease. The engines screamed in protest, warning glyphs flooding the display. Lixira's voice cut through the chaos, furious and cold. "You would cripple yourself for these animals?" Serenya's lips curled in something that was not quite a smile. "Not for them. For me." She slammed her palm against the activation glyph. The ship shrieked as the gravimetric field destabilized, power coils flaring to life. A brilliant wave exploded outward, a pulse of raw force that ripped through the cavern like a starburst. Verith soldiers convulsed as their targeting arrays fried. Lixira staggered as her blade sputtered, even her goddess armor overwhelmed by the shockwave. Kael, braced at the shuttle's hatch, stared as Serenya staggered under the pulse's recoil, her armor flickering, her hair lit like violet fire. For a heartbeat she looked both divine and impossibly human. And then she stumbled toward him, collapsing into his waiting arms. The shuttle lurched into the void, systems crippled but alive, carrying with it a goddess who had finally chosen life over death, and a man who now knew she would fight not for conquest, not for honor, but for freedom and for him. The Corin's Edge drifted wounded through uncharted stars, its gravimetric core scarred from the pulse, its systems flickering like a dying heart. Yet it carried life. Kael and his rebels worked tirelessly to keep the vessel afloat, salvaging circuits, patching conduits with human ingenuity that defied the ship's alien design. Serenya moved among them, her violet hair dim in the emergency glow, her silver armor stripped away piece by piece until she wore only simple rebel cloth scavenged for practicality. For the first time in centuries, She walked without the weight of runes and command. For the first time, she looked like a woman instead of a goddess. Weeks passed in tense silence until the crippled ship stumbled upon a planet of shimmering lakes and verdant forests, a sanctuary untouched by Verith patrols. Kael's people landed, with relief, building shelters along the lakeshore with hands blistered but hopeful. It was here that Serenya encountered something she had never seen before. A race of gentle, translucent-skinned beings who regarded both humans and Verith with wide, wary eyes. They had no weapons, no defenses, only fear. The rebels were cautious, but Serenya stepped forward, her melodic voice carrying across the clearing. She spoke in Verith tongue first, then in fractured human words she had been practicing, shaping herself into a bridge. And to her surprise, the beings responded, not with worship, not with obedience, but with trust. Her knowledge of conquest became a tool of peace, her divine bearing tempered into diplomacy. Where once she had commanded soldiers into fire, she now guided two fragile peoples into dialogue. Kael watched her from the edge of the camp, his broad shoulders bent over a half-repaired generator, sweat streaking his weathered face. But his eyes never left her as she knelt beside the alien children, tracing symbols in the dirt to explain safety, offering comfort with hands that had once carried only death. In that moment, Kael saw not the war goddess who had burned colonies, but Serenya, a woman reshaping herself before his eyes. That night, by the twin moons, Kael found her seated at the lake shore, her reflection fractured in the rippling water. He sat beside her in silence, the warmth of his presence more steadying than words. At last she spoke, her voice low. I was forged to destroy. Yet these people, they looked at me, and they did not fear. I do not understand it. Kael picked up a stone, tossing it into the lake, watching the ripples spread. Maybe because you didn't want them to. Maybe for the first time you wanted something else. Her pointed ears twitched, her gaze flicking toward him. What is it you see, Kael Daren, when you look at me? His answer was simple, steady. I see someone who chose. Not because command demanded it, not because honor demanded it, but because you did. The words settled into her chest like fire and balm both. She turned back to the lake, but her hand shifted, brushing his where it rested on the stone between them. For once she did not pull away, and for once she realized she no longer wanted to. Years passed like quiet tides, not marked by battles or conquest, but by seasons on a world that had once been nameless to them. The rebels rebuilt lives here, raising homes from timber and stone, forging tools instead of weapons. The gentle, translucent-skinned natives came to trust them, sharing the rhythms of the land, teaching survival not through domination, but through coexistence. And at the heart of this new beginning lived Kael Daren and Serenya Veyra. No longer commander and captive, no longer rebel and goddess, but partners bound by something more enduring than war. The once gleaming runes of Serenya's Verith armor now hung silent in a corner of their home, relics of a past she no longer carried as burden. Her violet hair had softened in its glow, her once unyielding posture tempered into quiet strength. Some nights she still startled awake with echoes of command voices in her mind, but Kael's steady arms and scarred hands always pulled her back to the present. And in the mornings, when their child ran laughing across the meadow, those ghosts lost their power. He was named Arik, a boy with his mother's luminous hair and his father's steady brown eyes, his laughter carrying across the fields like sunlight. The rebels adored him, the natives called him a blessing, but to Serenya he was proof that she had chosen rightly, proof that mercy had given her not weakness but life. She would watch Kael lift him high into the air, both of them laughing, and feel a warmth no battlefield had ever given her. Still, stories traveled faster than ships. Even in exile, Serenya's name spread. Among humans, she became the legend of the war goddess who laid down her blade, the one who chose mercy over death. Among Verith, she was the cautionary tale of betrayal, the goddess who fell. But on that lakeshore world, sitting beside Kael as the sun dipped gold across the horizon, Serenya understood that legend was only shadow. The truth was far simpler. She had been forged as a weapon, but she had chosen to be free. One evening, as twilight painted the sky, Kael sat on the porch of their home, his hair streaked with gray, his scarred hands still strong as he whittled wood into a toy for their son. Serenya joined him, her long ears flicking softly in the breeze, her violet hair catching the fading light. For a long time they sat in silence, the kind that required no words. Then Kael looked up, his smile quiet, weathered, full of a love that asked nothing and gave everything. She returned it, her lips curving not with command, not with superiority, but with peace. In that moment, Serenya knew her past had not been erased. It lived in scars, in memories, in blood spilled across stars. But it no longer defined her. Her legacy was not destruction. It was choice. It was mercy. It was love. And so the story of Serenya Veyra was told, not of the goddess who chose death over defeat, but of the woman who, when offered a hand by a human rebel, chose to live. A story that outlasted war, whispered to children of two peoples, proof that even the sharpest blade can be tempered into something far stronger, hope. If you believe humanity always finds the way, subscribe for more HFY Sci-Fi audiobooks.